All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's a very rainy day here in New Hampshire. Today is Sunday. It's the last day before Porcfest, which, despite the fact that the weather is going to be not the best, I'm very eager to go to, having not gone in about 3 years. So, very much looking forward to it. Uh, I'm staying in a hotel, so it won't really matter that it's raining too much. There's plenty of places to find shelter, and I have an umbrella, so I'll be good. Um, So let's see. Boo. Change the title here. Boo, boo, boo. How's everybody doing today? Yeah, so I'm going to go up tomorrow afternoon. I'm not going to go in the morning. I'm going to go to one jiu-jitsu class next week. Normally I would go to 7, so I'm going to have to count 1 being good enough, and then drive on up in the afternoon. And actually, a subscriber on here and I worked out a deal for a hotel room. So see, get the title up. I wish there was a way to set this before you start. And there probably is, but I just don't know it. Ooh, I got to change that. That is spelled wrong. Porfest. Porkfest. Save. There we go. So, boop, boop, boop. Porkfest. Yeah, I typed it wrong. Porfest. Yeah, there's a lot of that too. It would be interesting to know what the average income of a person going there. There is an interesting, I don't want to say dichotomy, but it seems like Porcfest and libertarians in general tend to draw people from very far on the shoulders of a bell curve. You don't get too many people who are kind of just average. You get people who are, some of them are just total messes. You get a lot of drug addicts, you get a lot of lazy bums, and then you get a lot of people who are like very high functioning, very intelligent, very successful, very capable, and then you get the same kind of thing on the social skills. You get some people who are totally suave and are you know refined and have great etiquette and social skills, and then you have people who have, the joke is on the spectrum, but that they are uh, like the joke is Asperger's. And I do remember one of the years that I went, there was a guy there, and a nice guy, but clearly had Asperger's, and like was difficult to talk to, and was always kind of fidget and couldn't make eye contact. And he was a programmer, and he was involved heavily in the creation of Ethereum, and I believe he's a billionaire now. He's one of the earliest Ethereum people. So you just never really know. My favorite color is blue. Definitely blue. So uh, it's just kind of it's a weird mix. So you've got the hippies, and then you got the straight-laced professional people. There's real estate agents. There's sometimes you get successful corporate people. Although I think that they tend to shy away from things like Porcfest. Uh, Poor libertarians are pathetic, use their knowledge and economics to advantage. Yeah, actually an interview that Hans Hermann Hoppe gave where he brings this kind of criticism up, where people, not that Hans Hermann Hoppe is poor, I don't know if he is or not. I'm assuming he's upper middle class, but I don't know. But he said one of the things people would criticize him for is say, well, if you know so much about economics, why aren't you rich? And there's a big difference between knowing how, I don't know, how a water current works or how the flow dynamics and being able to swim well. The entrepreneurship and work ethic really go a long way, and I think plenty of economists do have decent work ethics, but being an entrepreneur takes not only a lot of imaginative creative skills, but also a little bit of luck. So you don't get too many economists who, you get some who become wealthy because they're famous, and so when they publish books, they make a lot in royalties from that. So Paul Krugman probably does very well, but that is often more a function of their fame than of their acumen as an investor or as entrepreneurs. There may be exceptions, but I don't know of any off the top of my head. though I must admit I don't know the finances of every economist. It's because of their status, not because of their investing skills per se. Um, Obviously, recently there's been this kind of uptick of like, if they were into Bitcoin, there's a chance that many of them did well and or even became wealthy, and that seems to have been an interesting libertarian insight into money and the problems with a government-run money that I think was a valid insight, whatever problems there are, and there are indeed problems with Bitcoin. But that insight turned out to be very valid in principle, if not in execution, and I think a lot of people benefited from it. Um, uh, what type of economics do you like, Austrian or Chicago? Which one is better? I love your channel, man. Thanks. So I've obviously been much more influenced by the Austrian school. I've read a lot more of the Austrian school, like just general writings by Austrian economists and then books about Austrian economics, whether it's Human Action or Man, Economy and State, Theory of Money and Credit, a couple others. And I don't think it's fair because I haven't read a single book on Chicago economics. I witnessed a debate, if you want to watch it, called Chicago Economics versus Austrian Economics. That was a debate between Robert Murphy and David Friedman at Porcfest, probably 5 years ago. And this is not definitive because you're talking about two different debaters, although they're both highly intelligent, articulate guys. I definitely think David Friedman won that debate, but it did boil down to a lot of semantic distinctions. Uh, I think that a lot of it is the Austrians have these insights that I think are really good insights, but then they kind of stop there and say that's it. Anything going past that, they would quixotically say is not economics, right? There's certain things they would consider economic history or whatever, but they would not classify as economics. And other people, here I'm speaking specifically of econometrics and looking at economic data, that sort of thing. And uh, there was, but then there's other people like the Chicago people say, well, there's a lot of value in that. And I agree that there is value to it. And I think the Austrians would agree there's value to that too. They just wouldn't call that value economic. They would call it something else. Um, there's another interesting, if you read Radicals for Capitalism by Brian Doherty, he talks about how in the Austrian, any money creation is inflation, right? You don't have to look at prices. You don't have to look at liquidity. You don't have to look at any of that. If the government prints money, you have inflation, period. And this was something that they just take as a fact for theory, but like many economists don't believe that. And he talks about how Milton Friedman went through exhaustively going through all the tables and all the price indexes and reams and reams and reams and reams and reams and reams and stuff to arrive at the same conclusion, right? That printing money causes inflation, but just kind of two different approaches. So I'm much more influenced by the Austrian school, but I am not prepared to say, quote, it's better. I think they both have insights and they tend to arrive at similar conclusions, right? So David Friedman is an anarcho-capitalist, Murray Rothbard is an anarcho-capitalist. You know, they might be heterodox in or and how they think about things, but I think that they're politically allies for the most part, and you know, you can take what you can. Okay, but I do not even know who Steely Dan is, let alone like him. What do you find funny? What comedy stuff are you into? So of all my probably favorite show is definitely South Park. South Park has been the longest running, most consistently funny. The early episodes of The Simpsons are indeed also funny, but they really jumped the shark literally 20 years ago, if not more. And South Park is still fresh and still funny and still relevant and still good satire and from everything from toilet humor all the way to making sophisticated points. So I'm a huge South Park fan. Beyond that, movie-wise, I used to be a huge Monty Python fan as a child, especially The Holy Grail. Their television show, not as much, but some of that as well. But yeah, that would be it. Come on, D. Berkovic, why are you deleting your messages? What are your thoughts on agorism? I think agorism is a great idea. I think that there's a lot of potential there. I think the worse the regular economy gets, the stronger the agorist economy gets. And I don't know that it's a silver bullet or the only way forward. I don't know that it's like some kind of, like I said, it's not like a catch-all answer to everything, but it's also like de facto just what happens. We don't even need libertarian theorists for that to happen, right? We have gray markets anyway. So Did you find it easier to read Human Action or Man, Economy, and State? Definitely Man, Economy, and State. So Mises, it's really impressive when you read Man, Economy, and State, or I'm sorry, when you read Human Action, you are impressed, but like the vocabulary is just off the charts, and the use of grammar and the turns of phrase and the way that he can elucidate points, sometimes almost poetically, you are. It's amazing to think that Mises, I think English was like his fifth or sixth language. I mean, he spoke primarily German, probably Yiddish, French, uh, maybe Italian, maybe Latin, maybe like I think English was like his sixth language. It's been a while, and to think that he's writing at that level and that far down his language. Although to be fair, he also had a lot of help from Henry Hazlitt, who is primarily an English speaker. Rothbard's stuff is much easier to read. I think I mean, I think that Rothbard deserves a lot of credit for being an economist and a political theorist, but I think he punches above his he punches above his pay grade because or his weight class because his writing style is so good. Um, he wrote very well. Walter Block has talked about this, and not so much Man, Economy, and State, but the second part of that, Power and Market, is really well written, as are pretty much all of his books. So I think he has enormous advantage over Mises in terms of readability. But, yeah, I'll watch the debate. You can, yeah, and that's the thing. I did a review of it, but you can actually watch the actual debate and decide for yourself. Again, uh, how much of that is just David Friedman beating Robert Murphy or just arguing about semantics versus the actual schools? And the thing is, the schools are not the Austrian school. It's pretty close to like they have a theology or a dogma. They have a kind of central tenets. And I don't know if the Chicago school is that uniform, so it's kind of hard to pick and choose. Uh, Does libertarianism want to make English the official language? I'm going to say no, probably not. Uh, there might be some arguments about creating broad-based social connections, so having like a universal religion or a universal language or a gold standard or something like that. But I think most of them would not want that to be enforced from above officially, but just de facto. Still stacking silver. Yeah, I haven't bought anything in a while, but yes, I still have a stack of silver. Austro-libertarians are better. Well, I like Austro-libertarians tend to be more radical politically. Again, not always. David Friedman's pretty radical. They tend to, even though Austro-libertarianism is value-free, they tend to be more moralistic too. Friedman is pretty explicit about using utilitarian arguments, whereas Rothbard, maybe his economics are value-free, but he clearly, I mean, he believed in moral philosophy. That was, he wrote the Ethics of Liberty. He's very much into that as well. And those moral arguments actually they do resonate with a certain class of people more than utilitarian arguments do. I mean, certainly the simplest way to get across radical proposals is to say taxation is theft and the non-aggression principle, and that's pretty simple. You can sum it up pretty quickly. Um, but would have unsubscribed if you said Family Guy. Family Guy is not funny. Uh, it's just not. It's not funny. And I don't know. I mean, I used to watch it when it was in Adult Swim. When it was on hiatus, they stopped producing it for a couple years, and then it became popular in syndication on Cartoon Network. That was when I was in college, and even then, I didn't think it was funny, and it's gotten even worse. And South Park has eviscerated it. South Park has torn it to pieces in their episodes about Family Guy. They're the ones with Mohammed. The second one's with Mohammed. They did Mohammed earlier without a problem, but those are hilarious. Um, Human Action was Mises writing in English while thinking in German. Well, so yes, and originally Human Action was published in German, and then I think it was maybe in 1940, and then I think it was called National Economy, something like that, and then in 49 Human Action came out. But he did a lot of work with Henry Hazlitt, so it might be difficult to parse out how much of this language is from Mises and how much of this language is from Hazlitt. I actually have the German version of it somewhere in my books because the Mises Institute was selling it for like $1. Um, do, do, do. Do you sometimes get compared to the fictional serial murderer Dexter, appearance-wise? Actually, I do. I get compared to Dexter very frequently. People, just random strangers and people who know me. Funny, I've watched the first season on CBS. They actually, because they own Showtime, and they aired the first season highly edited. And it was the only show that I watched in college. I had a TV, but it only got one channel, and I never turned it on. And one day I got home from work and I turned it on, and it was the first episode of Dexter on CBS. And I ended up going and buying it on DVD, watching it, and then I would talk about it at work. I worked at a Krispy Kreme Donuts at the time as a cook, and there was this girl there from Africa who I would trade jabs with the entire times, and it was pretty funny. I'd call her a monkey and whatever, and she would call me a pasty white boy. But anyway, I was telling her about the show, and she really liked it. So I gave her the DVD, and she took the cover, and she's like, "Oh, he's so handsome." And then, she takes it for a week, and then a week later, she gives it back, and she's kind of staring at me, and she goes, "You look a lot like him." And I said, "You said he was handsome last week," and she just blushed, and it was funny. But yes, I do get that a lot. The other one that I get a lot is Theon Greyjoy, which I don't really see that, but I do see the Michael C. Hall, especially when he grows a beard. Uh, oh no, I'm falling behind, guys. I'm falling behind. Uh, are you a fan of guns? Of course. Big fan of guns. I should shoot them more than I do, though. Chicago Master Race checking in. uh, Austrian school is rationalist. Chicago school is empiricist. Chicagoans often don't have the math expertise to really do empiricist econ. Almost all economists don't. Yeah, I think that they're so different in their fundamental methodologies that it's kind of hard to compare them to the two. And the Austrians have this unusual definition of what they consider economics that's semantic. So there's a lot of stuff that they would consider valuable and worth doing. So if you read like Robert Higgs, I love Robert Higgs. He's wrote some of the best books that I've ever read, Crisis in Leviathan and Depression War and Cold War being the two, but he's also written really, really great economic histories of the United States. And he will say, "I'm not an economist, I'm an economic historian," because he's doing econometrics and looking at charts and tables and not doing like pure theory or a human action. So, that's a semantic difference, right? They just won't call it economics. It's something else. Uh, do you think the Libertarian Party should drop out of politics and be used as a liberty of philosophy to influence others? Um, I think that it doesn't hurt to have it as politics if it has a uniform, compelling message, which they haven't been able to do because too often they're just Republicans light. Beavis and Butthead or Ren and Stimpy. I hated both of them. Ren and Stimpy, I literally cringed when I watched it as a kid. I never made a point to watch it, but if other people were watching it and I was in the room, I couldn't stand it. It made me feel uncomfortable. And the same with Beavis and Butthead. Bear in mind, when those were airing, I was fairly young, and they had a rap of being like whatever naughty shows, and I was a good boy, and I did not want, like, I saw them and I never enjoyed them. Uh, yes, Family Guy is the worst, but the Orville is the best. Uh, I've heard the Orville is really good and that it's way better than Discovery and other Star Trek reboots, but I have not watched it. Um, does anyone like American Dad here? I've watched 1 or 2 episodes. I don't like it. Is it true that Gary Johnson supported Bake the Cake? Yes, he said that he would do it. Uh, so it's hard to hate him because he was such a good governor, and there's a lot, he compares favorably to so many other contemporary politicians, but really he was trash as a libertarian. I find the first 100 pages of Human Action easy to read. Is that a question or a statement? Dexter was great. Then they added John Lithgow. Yeah, I think Dexter really peaked in season 3 or jumped the shark in season 3. The stuff with the Trinity Killer just got too far. But season 1 is amazing. Season 2 is very good. Season 3 is very good. And then it just kind of went downhill from there. And apparently the creators, it wasn't after season 4, but they wanted to end it after like season 5 or 6. And Showtime said, "Hey, it's still a popular show. You have to keep going." And so they did. And no, it wasn't very good. Happy Father's Day, everyone. I haven't gotten a single message from any of my boys. It's so sad. Uh, Apart from the English language, do you speak any other languages? So I can speak some Icelandic, but it's very rudimentary. I can read it fairly well. I know how to phonate. I know the grammar, and I have a decent vocabulary, but I am not very well practiced. I have used it before. I was walking in Boston Commons, though, and I heard three ladies speaking Icelandic, and I had a conversation with them. A very rudimentary one, though. That's about it, though. Um, Ren and Stimpy. Nope, sorry. What counter opinions YouTube videos do you recommend or follow? So I actually have recently been watching a lot of what's his name? Oh fuck, he's a comedian and he's a Democratic Socialist. He was on Rogan. I forget his name. Uh, he's very anti-war, but he's he's a big Bernie supporter. What's his name? Jimmy Dore. The Jimmy Dore show. I like Jimmy Dore. Um, can't listen to David Pakman. He's just nope. I just he doesn't seem like a genuine person to me. But yeah, Jimmy Dore. I'll listen to Tim Pool too, although I don't think he's that far different. North Korea is libertarian. Did Nick Sarwark actually say that? Do you think the Mises people and Jeffrey Tucker will reconcile? They should, but I don't know. I really don't know. And I've never, I've seen Tucker for years at events, whether it was at Porcfest or International Students for Liberty, but I've never really talked to him, so I don't really know him. And I don't think I mean, I met Lou Rockwell's sister once, and I met Lou Rockwell once, but I didn't talk to them long enough to know them really well. Um, but Sarwalk Resign is the new Twitter account. If you want to kick out the socialists from the LP, we could use your help. I'm not on Twitter, so you guys will have to take that on. What's the state of the Libertarian Party right now anyway? I get the impression that it's become cringe. Well, it's been cringe. Okay, I think the best year that they had was the second year they ran a presidential candidate, which was in like 72 or 76. They started in 71. I think they ran presidential candidate 72, and then the 76 year, or maybe the 80 year, they did okay. I mean, meaning they got like 2% or something, or 1%. But they've just kind of been a joke since then. They've run. I mean, Ron Paul ran for them at one point, but that was kind of like the coup de grace, and they've just had a real hard time. Oftentimes, they just alternate between a radical and then some milquetoast Republican. And who's going to vote for them if they're just Republicans light? It's just a wasted vote, really. So it feels like they were misconceived. Yeah, Jimmy Dore, he's the one. How many kids do you have? Well, I don't have any biological children, but I have a lot of twink children who call me daddy. So uh, a number beyond count. What's your thoughts on the Iran situation? I'm highly skeptical that Iran attacked an oil tanker. Uh, if that wasn't us, it was Saudi Arabia would be my go-to. And until I see compelling actual evidence, not secret evidence, compelling actual evidence, that's what I'm going to believe. I think that they have shown enormous restraint after our years of aggression towards them. And we've kind of ironically helped them in a lot of ways by getting rid of like Saddam Hussein, who was their number one rival. So I think that there's no reason that the United States and Persia can't be friends. And it's just our warmongering, Zbigniew Brzezinski-esque federal government that thinks that it's got to have an antagonistic view towards them. Yeah, Jimmy Dore. I like Jimmy Dore. He's completely, it's one of those things too where he's like, right, wrong, wrong. Like completely right, completely wrong on issues. But I like his attitude, and I think he's at least honest actor, which is more than you could say for somebody like Cenk Unger, because those guys are just they're not intellectually honest. Tucker just has to stop calling the Mises people racist. Yeah, I don't understand. Someone was posting this in one of the groups that I was in. This idea that the Mises people are all white nationalists or crypto racists or neo-Confederates, I just think is so ridiculous. Even the worst stuff that Rothbard wrote or was published in the Ron Paul newsletter, these guys are clearly methodological individualists and not racist in any meaningful sense. That stuff was kind of par for the course back then. I'm not excusing it, but I mean, you had Klansmen who were in high office at the time. This would be like dismissing Reason or Cato because some of their writers were for the Iraq War, let's say, Iraq War II. that's even a worse thing. But I wouldn't go and say Cato and Reason are worthless and they all hate Arabs, but yet some of their chief editors did. So um, yeah, I think that it's totally unfair, and I think that part of it is petty infighting. There's a lot of petty differences going back to Rothbard and Ed Crane and the Kochs that's kind of carried on through the generations, and then there's a lot of woke virtue signaling on the part of the Beltway. Beltway libertarians are not like regular libertarians in a lot of ways. Some of them are ideologically pure and are pretty hardcore, but most of them have cushy lives working on that Coke money for that Coctopus. And I know I have a lot of gay friends who do that. There's so many fucking gay dudes who work for the Coctopus. It's not even funny. I mean, if you've ever seen the Reason TV shows, I know their cameraman. I've hooked up with their cameraman many times. He's a cool dude, and he's a good ideological libertarian. But like, it's a different crowd. They're the urbanite, polite gays. So there's a lot of pettiness and there's a lot of wokeness there, and they're making a big deal out of stuff that in context isn't that bad. I'm not going to defend it and say it was fine, but it's not that bad. Um, do libertarians support feminism? I think libertarians are more traditional. They go on both, but it depends how they define feminism. Uh, like, I'm not on Twitter. Do you follow Terry Lynn Coleman on Facebook? No. The LP has been co-opted since 2001. By who? Co-opted by who? And I think their problems go back before that, if we're being honest. Have fun at Porcfest. Thanks, Eric. You should come. I know you keep saying you will, but like, how long have we known each other and you haven't done it yet? I agree with your take on Iran. Yeah. And a big part of that is because of our alliance with like Saudi Arabia and Israel, who are bitter enemies of Iran. And that's a huge part of the thing here. But there's no reason. They're no threat to us. They're not trying to attack us. They don't threaten us in any way. They don't even really threaten those countries. I mean, I guess Saudi Arabia would be in trouble if they got in a serious war with Iran and nobody helped them, but that's just not likely to happen. So, and I would question our alliances with all those countries, with Israel, with Saudi Arabia. I would. I mean, I'm quite a non-interventionist. I would even question it with, say, Turkey, but those other countries, it's just ridiculous. And it's funny too, the degree that we bend over backwards for allies that we don't need. Some of the Mises people hang out with a lot of racists. Some of them with a lot of racists, but I mean, that's totally guilt by association. Uh, why don't the LP focus on specific electoral writings? That's how third parties built support in Westminster-style government. Well, you'd have to ask them, Stephen. I don't know. But we don't have a Westminster-style government, so it may not be as feasible. The way the two parties are set up here, they make it very hard anywhere for that to happen. I believe that year that they did really well, they did get somebody elected in Alaska. I want to say they got a couple people elected there, and then that like fizzled out almost immediately. But I heard that Tucker used to be a hardcore alt-writer back in the day, and a reading of The Road to Serfdom snapped him out of it. Maybe he's Catholic, and like he seemed strongly anti-socialist when I was first watching him, and then when the alt-right kind of came along, he started saying how the real danger isn't from red, it's from brown, right? It's from the National Socialists, not the leftist socialists. So he seems a little wokey to me, but whatever. Uh, Serfdom. Uh, oh my God, no murdering, please, in the comment section. But da, da, da. Do you think Israel should be attacked? Should be attacked? Like, no. because they have nukes and they'll nuke back. So no, they shouldn't be attacked. I think that the Palestinians in the West Bank should probably just demand equal citizenship in Israel. I think that's their best bet because Israel's not going to let there be a state there, and no one else is going to help them do that. And so, and there are definitely Palestinians who are trying to do that. I think that's their best bet. It's not a good bet. It's an awful situation for them, but I think that's their best bet. Uh, Do you mind if strangers approach you and introduce themselves at Porcfest? No, not at all. I would welcome that. Doesn't happen that often. I'm not that well known, but I usually get a couple every year. Especially if they are cute, then I definitely don't mind. Uh, do you think there will be a civil war in America? Definitely think it's becoming more possible. That doesn't mean it's particularly likely right now, but as the current trajectory goes, we have a very large cultural difference that's getting worse, and the ability to talk it over, to have a non-acrimonious conversation is getting harder and harder and harder. So I think that we are heading that way. It's not inevitable, I wouldn't say that, but we're heading in that way. We don't have a killer issue that's going to split everybody like slavery. None of the issues we have today are that contentious, but some of them are very contentious, whether it's abortion or gun rights. Those are probably the biggest two single ones. Uh, I don't even think them together is anywhere close to as contentious as slavery was in the 1850s, but that could change, right? If we start having very strong anti-gun regulation from Congress that is resisted at the state level, which I can guarantee it would be, things could escalate quite quickly. Uh, Thoughts on Chris Cantwell? So I've never really watched Chris Cantwell. He seems the clips I've seen, he seems like, I mean, he's definitely a smart guy and whatever, but he seems kind of pathetic in a lot of ways. I think he wants to be a tough guy and he's not. And you know, he went to do this. I mean, this whole thing in Charlottesville was overblown so much, but he's there and then he's crying like a little baby because he's getting under the scrutiny of the cops. So I think he's somebody who wants to be a tough guy and wants to be a leader or whatever. And I just don't buy the idea that race realism is some kind of pragmatic third way, that libertarianisms are just too dogmatic to resist. I just am not persuaded by those arguments. But again, I don't watch him enough to know too much about him. He's attempted to go to Porcfest years that I was there and was banned. So you know, I've been close to me. I think one year he was giving away free beers across the street from Porcfest, but I don't drink, so I didn't go see him. But do you have a love interest? Not at the moment. Do you think that nuclear families are the foundation of civilization? Well, I don't think that the foundation of civilization can be pegged down to one thing, but there would be a couple things, and that would be one of them. But you know, having a common language, having commerce, common religions, those sorts of things. You definitely need something that goes. See, the problem there is like civilization. You need to get some kind of social bond that goes beyond the kin group. Otherwise, you're talking about tribalism and you know, hunter gatherers and whatnot. So yes, family is a necessary component of that, but you need stuff that goes farther than that. And religion has done that in the past. I'll be fair. I'll give the devil his due. Like states have done that in the past, and they do that today. But there's other things that you have to have if you're going to get bigger. Because you can't have a society based on a family, right? So you have to have inter-family cooperation to the extent that they can live together without fear of getting, you know, murdered. Uh, I give too long an answer. I always thought that Tucker was gay too, but apparently I was incorrect about that. And whenever I've seen him at Porcfest, he's kind of like a playboy. He's driving around in a convertible, hanging out with all the pretty girls. So, you know, good for him. Have you read Michael Malice's new book? I've started it, but I haven't finished it. I'm about 3 chapters in. So, I'm desperate for money. Chris Cantwell on all of his blogs. Yeah, and somebody found his OkCupid profile too, and he was claiming that he made a lot of money. And then people are like, wait, but now you're asking for money, but you claim you make a lot of money. So, do you ever watch Fringe Elements videos? So yeah, he's alternative hypothesis now, and I just recently subbed to him. I wasn't even aware that he was still making stuff. And I do tend to like his stuff, even if I don't agree with it all the way. Michael Malice's book got roasted on the JFG stream. What's the JFG stream? Uh, bu- bu- bu. I don't know who JF is. Tucker is gay. Okay, there we go. But he's got kids. He wouldn't be the first. Spontaneous order, but see, okay, I agree with that. Spontaneous order is a thing, but I don't know if it's the thing. Uh, I was watching him whisper in a dude's ear while tickling his palm for like 10 minutes. Maybe that's just the friendly thing that he does. I've never witnessed that, but he is very lispy. Uh, Jean Francis Garpley. I don't know who that is. Some Quebecois. I don't know him. Do you remember when Fringe Elements hacked into Brain Police's account and deleted all of his videos? So I do remember that happening. Obviously, I didn't see it happen, but I was watching both of them at the time. I'd been watching, I think I watched Brain Police first. I think he got on the scene a little bit earlier. And Fringe Elements wasn't called Fringe Elements back then. He had gone through numerous names: Studdles, Confederal Socialists, the what was the other one? The Anarchy of the Nuts, just tons and tons of different iterations. And yes, there was a big 2006, 2007 YouTube drama that he hacked Brain Police and deleted them. And then I never, did anyone ever hear from Brain Police ever again? Like, uh, so yes, I do remember that. And it was sad because I did like Brain Police's videos. He was kind of more like a proto left libertarian, but uh, bu- 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 yeah, Fringe. I mean, I remember watching him before he was an anarcho-capitalist, and then he did a whole bunch of debates with a YouTuber called Austro Libertarian, who no longer makes videos but made good videos way back in the day. I mean, I was still in college, so it was in 2006, 2007, around then, and uh, then he became an anarcho-capitalist, and then he became a race realist, and now he's a, I don't know, a minarchist or whatever. But he made a video about music last year. Oh, that's news to me. Alex Streckel. Yeah, there are a couple of those guys who got. I mean, Ex Omniverse got kind of doxxed at one point. Somebody who knew parts of his personal history was posting about that he was a piece of shit or whatever, because he, I don't know, he not paid a debt or he dropped out of school or something like that. So there's a lot of like petty drama like that, and we don't know. I don't know what the story is behind Fringe Elements and Brain Police. From what I know, it doesn't sound. It sounded like he acted really bad, but I don't know. I think he was initially a race realist before an anarchist. Well, he was called Confederal Socialist for quite a while, so that would make sense. So he was returning home. Chicken's coming home to roost. But I like a lot of his videos. I just don't agree with everything. Like his review of Jared Diamond's book was really good. Can you be a libertarian while still being a Satanist? Well, Saul Invictus proved that you can. But I liked, well, oh, because Brain Police's name was WizKid. Okay. What is incompatible with race realism and ANCAP? Well, nothing per se. If you're just going to say there are racial differences and they're based on genetics and there's race and you have what that there's nothing about that that is incompatible with ANCAP. The problem is that the race realist, then, and I did a whole video on this called the political implications of race realism. And the thing is, it doesn't matter if you have populations that have lower IQs or have slightly higher whatever aggression or lower time preference or whatever. None of that justifies the state. None of that leads to the conclusion, oh, universal health care would work, or roads can only be built by governments, or any of that. All that would still be better, most optimally dealt with in a free market society. There's nothing about that. In fact, if you're talking about a democratic state, that's even, I think that hurts democracy more than it hurts any like a non-democratic system. So I just think that there's this huge logical leap from, blacks are different than whites, because this is ultimately what we're talking about, which, yeah, there are differences that matter statistically, and I think that's fine. And to say that it's kind of silly to say that there's no genetic component. We know that there is a genetic component, and then it'd be quite large. That does not lead to the conclusion then that there needs to be a white ethno state, or any state for that matter. There are also things about it that I found really arbitrary. People didn't like me saying that, but I'm not saying that there's no genetics involved, but I'm saying who gets to be included in the ethno state is kind of arbitrary. So, I have my certain genetic code, and then obviously my immediate family, they're pretty close. But as we start moving out from that, where do you draw the line? So, should I consider a Frenchman my kin but not a German? Should I consider a German my kin but not a Hungarian? It's kind of arbitrary. What cluster of genes are we going to say uh, uh, I should get in the trenches for and fight and die for, and which ones should I view as the outgroup that I can't get along with? And also, it's not clear to me, like, what are they proposing, that a white girl can't date a black dude, that you can't do business with them, that you can't own it, like you can't have customers, right? If you're white and you have a black person come in, you can't give them. I mean, I don't mind if they voluntarily don't want to do it, that's their right, but like the race realists don't seem satisfied with that. So yeah. Saul was a pagan. I don't think he liked being called a racist by Brain Police. That's what triggered him to hack the account. That's not a good reason to hack someone's account. What's your thoughts on the Volks Pocalypse situation? I think that it's a combination of two things going on, two big things going on. One, you have old media that's trying to silence and control new media. Two, you have the ideology of the far left Silicon Valley people who run all these things, who are just super sympathetic to censorship, right? Because they have this expansive idea of microaggression and name calling, and so there's just, that's the guise, but it's also sincere. I think they sincerely believe, they look at someone like Steven Crowder and think this is fundamentally wrong in some way and we should not allow it. But they're going to kill themselves, because if they start policing content as they are, look, and I had a video taken down and I'm nobody. So if they're just going to destroy their content creators. Crowder has a big channel with a lot of following. What's his incentive to put work and effort into that if they're just going to demonetize everything for him? So, and it's not just him, it's him and everybody else. Uh, okay. There are a lot of high IQ people who love the state. Talk to your average Mensa. Yeah, I mean, Einstein was a socialist. I think that the conclusions, I mean, there's some trends and there are things, oh, they can say blacks, whatever, vote Democratic more, but it's really contingent on my society, right? If we had an NCAP society, blacks would be, blacks are conservative religious people too in general. So intelligence and libertarianism are not like one-to-one correlates. remember watching some race realist lectures refer to the Northeast Koreans as white. Yeah, that's the other problem. If they're talking about like racial white supremacists and they're just going to go off of IQ data, then they're not the supreme. Jews and Japanese and Northeast Asians are. And I mean, would they say, well, we should all be the intermensch to them? No, they wouldn't. So it's kind of arbitrary where you draw the club. But everyone knows what white is. There's never this worrying about what is white when the SJWs say white should pay reparations. Well, so I agree that there shouldn't be reparations, and I agree that I don't care if they're a different social outlook. I don't care if the average black person makes less than the average white person. I don't assume that that is a moral claim on other people. I don't believe in reparations. I don't believe in any of that. So, uh, like, we agree policy-wise as far as that goes. Um, do you think the U.S. military draft will ever come back? If so, what ages could be targeted? I think it's very unlikely. Could Obviously, if there's a big enough war or whatever, it could happen. But I think it's very, very, uh, um, very, very unlikely because um, they like the volunteer military. It allows them to do things with the military they can't do. An army of draftees is very unpopular, and then all of a sudden you get all this pushback about imperialism. The big difference between now and Vietnam is we have a quote unquote volunteer army, and so people are not getting as upset. They're not getting hardly upset at all. And so they basically have a free hand in terms of foreign policy, which they don't have with the draft army. And also, a draft army is just not as good. Or you have all these people in the military who don't want to be there. So yes, if it was a big enough war, they would, but we're not anywhere close to that. What else do you agree with Fringe elements about besides his reviews of Jared Diamond's book? I don't know, probably a lot of things. I probably agree with him on a ton of stuff. Uh, yeah, but how many days will you be camping at Porcfest? What type of camping will you do? I'm staying in a hotel, so no camping at all. Uh, Ashkenazi Jews vote Democrat too. I don't see race realists advocating to limit their immigration, assuming they consider Jews to be white. No, it's funny because they do. I mean, a lot of race realists and white nationalists don't like Jews and do debate them, but then they weirdly want to emulate Israel. Like a lot of them look at Israel and like that's kind of what we want, or we want something along those lines. Um, you have an apartheid state that's not an apartheid state. Uh, so there's kind of a love-hate relationship there. It's undeniable that Jews are really smart. And then the question is, how much do they have group identity? And I think the answer is some of them have a lot and some of them have very little. I mean, there's a lot of renegade Jews out there, for instance. Um, so, yeah, I think that they have a very schizophrenic view of the Jews. I think Americans are propagandized enough to join the patriotic fervor of the U.S. in anything. Not in anything. They don't. I agree that I do agree Americans are propagandized to be patriotic and to love the military and love the government and think it's the answer to everything. But there's also a lot of cynicism and anti-government rhetoric too. And like right after 9/11, they had a lot of support, but it fades after a while. Do you think the military should be defunded and America should form militias to provide defense for the country? Well, the founding fathers thought that, and I think that that is probably a good idea. We are in a lot of trouble because of our foreign policy, and I don't think that we would be vulnerable. We would be one of the. Yeah, there are just geographic reasons for this, that have nothing to do with whatever politics the United States adopts, but we're very, very, very safe from foreign invasion. And the idea that we need this massive standing army, no. And the argument was, well, we shouldn't have a standing army. A, we don't need it. If we do need an army, we can raise one from scratch pretty quick, which we historically always were able to do. But then if we have one, then all of a sudden that will corrupt and pollute the politics. And the army will go around looking for things to do. And that's exactly what's happened. Are you staying in the Cabot Inn? I'd have to check, but I think so. Have to check with the person I'm staying with. Um, Someone I have become a big fan of is a guy named Owl Thrasher, speaks truth to power, and he is more over on the left, but you have some things in common. Would you be willing to debate him? I don't know him at all, so I can't answer that question. Never heard of him. Another difference between now and Vietnam is centralization of education. I feel like we've become less centralized since then. I think the heyday of centralized everything was mid-century, at least ideologically, and now with all of the homeschool and the charter schools, that I think that uh, there's this balance between forces holding society together and forces pushing them apart. And I think starting around the New Deal and all through World War II, and probably up till the end of the Cold War, the forces holding it together were the stronger of the two. And without that outside enemy, and with the growth of alternative media, I think that we're starting to see centripetal forces uh, spread U.S. society apart more, become more polarized and more distinct, and um, less monolithic. It was never truly monolithic, but minority viewpoints and cultures were kind of suppressed and taken out, and now they've become more popular. So, um, uh, yeah. So I think we have less centralization than we did before in a lot of ways. Now the bureaucracy is very large and whatnot, but its control on society isn't. Should sanctuary cities be banned? No. Uh, did you see? I know Colin's video about Hoppe was worse. So I met him at Porcfest years ago when he was like 15, but I have not seen his most recent videos. Why was France able to conquer Germany or Switzerland, but Germany wasn't? Yeah, one word: Napoleon. Um, and then the other thing is Germany. Germany. Okay, there's a really good book on Switzerland in World War II called Target Switzerland by a very good libertarian named Joe Davis or William Davis. And there's no question that Germany could have conquered Switzerland in World War II, but it would have been very, very difficult. And it would have really hurt their economy. There are all these rail lines that went through Switzerland, and the Swiss could instantly have destroyed them because they have all these tunnels that go through the Alps. And it would have taken like 50 divisions. And the thing is, another difference: Germany was already engaged in a war with Great Britain. Eventually, it was engaged with a war with Russia, and the idea that it's going to use 50 divisions against Switzerland, what's going to destroy their infrastructure, and who knows, it could last months or even years. Because yeah, the Swiss would resist, and then they'd retreat in what they called the Redoubt Nationale, the Alps, essentially. I think I did a whole video on this called Target Switzerland, but it's a great book. But yeah, Napoleon had he didn't have to worry about a sea invasion from England. He didn't have to worry about fighting the United States or the Soviet Union. So it was just a totally different geopolitical situation. And Hitler is no Napoleon. But you impress me so much. Sending you hugs and love. Wow, thank you, Stuart McRae. I appreciate it. Um, well, there's about 835 million guns in the U.S., so I think there's proof to provide the market anarchy for defense. I don't think there's 835 million guns. I think most estimates put it more like 300 million, but that's still plenty. Uh, Heyday of centralization was during World War II and the Great Depression. Yes, and I would say maybe their immediate aftermaths. Uh, I agree with that. And you used to have way more newspapers, and it kind of got. You still had some, but a couple national chains, a couple national radio stations, a couple national TV stations, really dominated the social discourse. If you go back to the 19th century, you just had more smaller papers, and so you got a wider array of opinions. And now with the internet, you're getting that again. So yeah, I think that there was this partially technological, partially geopolitical, where you had these big enemies, where they were the Nazis, the Japanese, and then the Soviets, kind of forcing us together. And I think the fall of the Soviet Union really has taken the pressure off the United States and allowed uh, these cracks to emerge and to broaden, and that's going to continue to happen because as big as 9/11 was, Islamic terrorism, Islam in general, is just not that threatening in comparison. And that's not minimizing its threat. I'm just saying it does not compare to the Soviet Union, and modern day Russia does not compare to the Soviet Union. Stephen Kotkin, I listened to a speech by him, and he said, at its height, the Soviet Union had about a third the GDP of the United States, although it was probably less than that, and a bigger military and whatever. And now it's 1/14 the GDP, and its population is half the United States, and so it's completely not the same. Germany didn't invade Switzerland. They did have plans for potential invasion in later years, though. They definitely did have plans. They definitely considered it. Hitler did not like Switzerland for ideological reasons, and he did want to incorporate their German population into a greater Reich, and they started putting Switzerland on the map as part of Germany. But it was made abundantly clear that the Swiss would resist. They would blow up the tunnels that went through the Alps, which was the main conduit of exchange between Italy and Germany and the Mediterranean and Germany. And the Swiss could very easily hold out in the Alps